Welcome to the Faithful Fathering Podcast. This is Rick Wirtz, the founder and president of Faithful Fathering, where we encourage and equip dads to be faithful fathers and charge dads in raising a godly generation by reinvigorating their church on the fathering front. This podcast series, we're staying with spiritual leadership because dads, I'm with you, are a challenge. We have so much to do in the office to provide well for our families and to just stay active in society that we tend to lead secularly by example versus spiritually by example. And so that's the journey we're on. And in the studio with me today, I have a dear friend, Mr. John Murphy. John, as we've just spoken about your first experience with the concept of faithful fathering on a weekend retreat and how that sparked you on a spiritual leadership front with your boys and in your home with your bride. And I think it was maybe a year, or it was some window of time after that retreat, we met and realized that there was a mutual friend in your church that had also been on a similar retreat with his daughter, I believe. And can you share a little bit about how, because the core of faithful fathering is to come beside the church to raise up what we call a core group or a leadership team of dads to lead the way, to take on our strategy that we call pass the baton strategy, and to raise the bar for fathering in the church. So you guys embrace that, and you in particular, I thought really provided a spark with what happened at your church. Can you share a little bit about how that manifested?
Yeah. So I think one of the great things, you follow up. You follow up, and I believe it was, I can't remember the time frame afterwards, if it was like 3-6 months or a year, but I do remember you said, "Hey, I want to get breakfast and just check in, see how these things
certainly
are going."
With all the Jayhawks,
yes,
I know.
That's right. Certainly with all the Jayhawks. But you said, I want to check in and just see where you're at, see how you're doing. And so it was for a morning breakfast. And so we met, and at the breakfast, you mentioned another fellow at my church, Sean, who was on, I think, a father-daughter retreat. And he was in the class, the Sunday school class, I think above me, the next level up. But I was very, we were familiar with each other, and I was excited about the retreat, but I was still wasn't sure how to kind of what to do with it exactly at the church, and with the different guys at our church. So I remember reaching out to Sean, and he was on fire too about it. And like I said, this was kind of a new experience for me, being involved in these kind of things. And so it was very exciting, just that there was these resources out there and men out there and people out there, and that we could go through this together, especially back then, because a lot of us were young dads. And so and just didn't have these lessons to lean on. So right off the bat, me and Sean said, let's figure out what to do. And I think Sean is the one that suggested, hey, let's get Rick here for a breakfast to tell his story to a bigger group. And I remember you coming in for the breakfast, and I remember, you did your rendition of Cats in the Cradle, brought the house down. Once again, it was like, if you have a thing you think you're taking life too fast, that song will stop you dead in your tracks and, hit you in a different kind of way. But right after that, I remember me and Sean, we reached out to the leadership at our church and said, hey, we want to start something here. And they were very supportive, and somewhat in the supportive sense, is they didn't get in the way, and they gave us support from the pulpit too. I remember they talked about it from the pulpit, hey, encouraging, hey, dads. At that time, we called ourselves, we want to start this group, and I remember who came up with the name, but Dads of Grace, so dogs for short, just kind of stuck, and it was great. There was a group, I think at the time, because there was a Sunday school class above me, ours, one below me, and I want to say at the time we had dads that we pulled for these Dads of Grace in their 20s, 30s, 40s, maybe even 50s. So it was a great cross section of men from all those different, you call them all those different, seasons of fathering. And we can get into the experiences of it, but the different things. But it was I look at it as just like almost this golden time of just starting out, and with all of us a lot of us being in the same season.
It was golden in a lot of ways because you used your gifts to create a couple of videos that just conveyed not only the age diversity in the group, that there's just a good generativity across, which is what we always love to see in a group. You want to see different seasons of fathering represented. You want to see the group reflect the demographics of the church, and you want to see some guys that are teachers, some guys that are coordinators, some guys are just outdoors guys. These kinds of things could present. But as I recall, there were probably eight or so guys on that initial core group. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And I do remember, that, the church was so wonderful about it. Like if we did a video, especially the initial video to garner support, we would see it on a Sunday morning, right. They would show it up on the, on the screens, and, it was just awesome to have that support, not just from the initial get-go with, and we can talk about the different activities we participated in through Faithful Fathering, but yeah, some of the, and we also had another dad who was one of the pastors there that was also involved too, and it was really I think back of it being very sometimes we make things very complicated in life, and I remember they made at that point of starting that while there was a lot to plan out and things, but it was really simple. They didn't make it overly complicated for the support that they gave us at the time.
Right. I do remember Chris being on the core group. And, we try not to have staff on the core group, but it sure helps when there's a staff member that's a dad that's there because he's a dad, because he also has access to the church calendar, so that when it comes to scheduling things, it works out very well. Now, with that, one of the first activities that you did, as I recall, was an overnight on site, and that required a lot of scheduling, a lot of stuff. Can you remember?
Yeah. So this is such a great, fun memory. There are a lot of dads that have never been camping with their kids. Have never been around a fire with their kids or anything like that. And so one of the great things we did,
life in the big city.
That's right. Is we had an overnight camp out on our soccer grounds at our church. There were a lot of dads at that. So yes, we scheduled it. And it was a fun weekend of lots of good cooking, camping in tents on the soccer fields, waking up, and the church had no problem. We sat in the balcony, all of us going to service together in the morning. And the night before, I remember in the gymnasium is where we kind of just slowed things down, and you had questions to prompt.
We had a dodgeball game first. So the dads could leave their arms on the court.
We had a dodgeball game, which that was fun. Like the boys love activities like that. When you mix a little bit of roughness in with an activity, it's always a hit. But I do remember once again. There were question prompts that would force you to be intentional and find out those same things I talked about in the last podcast of getting to know your son, and also letting them get to know you. And I didn't mention that in the last podcast, but you had questions for them to ask you as well. And because there's sometimes we don't even talk about those things or take the time to talk about them. But yes, the overnights were fun, just to see dads who don't normally camp, of being able to have a little miniature experience of stuff that we've done and bigger things later on. But it was a little like, it's almost like a little teaser, like, do this little overnight camp out, and it gives you a little sampling of some other things that, you do through Faithful Fathering.
As I recall, there was some wiffle balls, some kickball, some football going on in the soccer field all afternoon long on the overnight, and then we grilled out some burgers and hot dogs and just had chips in the good way, and then had the activity of dodgeball, and then the spiritual component was that interview, if you will, and then just some discussion, because when Jesus told Philip, "If you know me, you know the Father," we have to open the door for our kids to know us a little bit better as well, which is part of the deal for that interview process.
Yeah, I think one of the things when you're being interviewed by your kids or you're talking to your kids is your kids, they want you to be consistent. They want you to be a good dad. But I think no one has it all together, and I think if you go to your kids and you're putting up this like sort of wall that you have everything together, you have no problems, and you're trying to be the strong person, they might be fooled into thinking that. And then when things come along for them, they're not even think their dad can even relate because he has it all together. He doesn't have those things. And I think, and that's something I struggle with, and I struggle with it continually, is wanting to put up that good face of, I want to act like I have it all together, when really a lot of times they need to see that you are human and that you're just like them in a lot of ways. And especially at your different seasons, that you struggled with different sin and different things like that. And that you can be open and honest with them about it. And that's something that I'm working towards all the time, to be more open, but it's still a challenge.
I think that's, they usually realize that by teenage years anyway. Our charge is to always understand, that we don't put us on a pedestal. They want to, of course, just like we would. We'd want to put our fathers on the pedestal, but our job is to not let us be perceived that way, that we're growing, but we will point to the perfect Father. There's only one perfect Father, and that's our Heavenly Father, and that's who we point to Him through Jesus Christ. But that overnight, I recall, you're right, I think that first year we must have had 60 dads and kids. There were boys and girls.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't a strictly father-son deal. There's some daughters who wanted to get out there and have some fun with their dad too.
That's right. That's right. I always have to remember it. I always have my lens is the father-son thing. But yeah,
that's understandable.
But you're right. There were a lot of daughters there as well for that weekend. Yeah, and it was cool seeing kids just like getting to do these camping with their dads and just playing with their dads and also interacting with each other too. It was cool.
Yeah, and that I thought it was a great environment. And so the takeaways from there was dads realized that there were other dads in similar situations. There were other dads focused on trying to be a better dad and engaging with their kids. Is there anything else about that group? I know we moved from there. We did some studies as well. What do you recall about the dad-specific studies?
I remember that was a big springboard, was those overnights, but also that it led to these, I think it was Thursday morning or Wednesday morning studies. I think it was Thursday morning studies or Friday morning studies at the church. I can even recall the little room right at the front of the church that we would meet at on those mornings at like 6 or 6:30, whatever it was. And
manly hour.
The manly hour. I remember being with, I can think of a lot of the guys that were there taking in, the Nehemiah initiative was one of them. Just these lessons that were taught and just that we were going through it together and just being equipped, just slowing down to be equipped, really stands out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I recall that as well, that the studies, it was just so cool to see, you were one of the early churches that embraced the strategy that was to have the fun activities, the easy to plug in activities, and then follow it up with studies, because, us dads didn't, if we got the owner's manual on our kids when we got home from the hospital, we didn't read it.
Yeah.
And we didn't reference it as the kids started to grow up. So these little studies would help guide us.
And whether it was Nehemiah or Dads Becoming Heroes, we did multiple studies. And I remember it wasn't just the lessons. We would have little breakout groups, and where you, once again, you're great with coming up with questions that dig a little deeper, that you as guys, we don't talk about anything of real substance a lot of the time. We're as much as I love sports and other things, that's a lot of times we're talking about that. But you can do all those kind of conversations without ever being vulnerable, without ever giving a piece of yourself a way for someone to really get to know you or get to know what you're struggling with. But I remember those questions, and we sit in those in our tables and discuss. It would force you out of your comfort zone at times a little bit to be vulnerable and say, hey, here's where I'm struggling. This is what's going well, and this is what my takeaways are. And it was, I don't know how I don't think I drank coffee back then. I'm surprised because I certainly would now.
What you're saying is exactly why I call them vulnerability groups, because, men will be accountable to each other in lies, right? So unless we're vulnerable to be real, then we can be accountable in the group. Now, I also remember that it was a Presbyterian church, and the Presbyterian at that time, there were several churches in the city going through a process called discernment.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit of how that group, I remember the interim pastor really recognizing you guys as a catalyst for the grounding that you men brought together for the message that he was conveying. Can you share a little bit of that process?
Yeah. So we had I feel like when you're involved in a discernment process, they're important, but a lot of it you get very caught up in the process itself, the politics, the vote, the this, that, and the other. It gets you very busy into what needs to be done to go through that. And you can, I do remember we had a ton of support from our interim pastor at the time. He got faithful fathering. He knew that, hey, while we're going through this, you still need to be grounded. I like that you use the word grounded because I think that's what I'm thinking of, because everything we were doing in faithful fathering, it didn't depend on whatever was happening with the discernment process. It was still equipping us to be faithful fathers, faithful husbands, Christ followers, and where everything around us was in this like sort of swirling like tornado of activity. I do remember just that. I think it's a bigger thing. I thought I was thinking about that discernment process and thinking about being involved in faithful fathering at the time. And I think when you're involved with, in this fathering journey, there's all kinds of obstacles that can get in your way that you can use as excuses for not being grounded. That even schedules or something bad happens or this happens or whatever, you can focus on that and just let off the gas a little bit. And I think like that discernment process, you could totally let off the gas and just go 100% into that and not still equip yourself and be spiritual and to pray and to be with other guys. Because I do remember it, as you said, grounded. We're doing all these things while that was going on, and it didn't matter it was going on. We were still being equipped through faithful fathering.
Well, I know that the pastor at that time was really just appreciative of the men, because he knew that you guys were praying for him as well as the overall process, as just part of who you guys were, and that was just a blessing to watch you guys from that standpoint. Is really a blessing. What encouragement do you have for dads that maybe they'd like to see something going on in their church? How hard was it to get going? What are your suggestions for maybe a first step or just encouragement for a dad to pursue getting a core group or a leadership team started in his church?
I think, we're talking now. I think it's tougher now. That was like 10, 12 years ago. We had things that were competing for our attention. I think a lot more is competing for our attention now, especially with young dads. You hear a lot of them that just talk about they're involved in doing so many things, and they don't want to be overcommitted here or this, that, and the other. And not trying to be overcommitted, but you were saying about the original core group there being like 8 dads. I would say all you have to do is find a few. Don't worry about finding a big group. Find a couple that are in the same stage and that want this. Everybody, they all need it, but you have to I think that actually want it. And then if there's a few of you starting, start going through it together, and then encourage other dads to join and be part of it. And if they can see a difference, for me, the wives might be the key. That was the key for me at the time, of getting initially involved, and there might be something there as well. But I think just getting a couple of dads to start and then to grow it from there would be a great place.
Looking back, we always say that, we try to be a lay-led ministry, right? We come beside, you, as you know, faithful fathering is as involved as the church wants us to be involved, as a dad wants us to be involved. But the materials are all available and the strategy is available. We always say we work to complement the church on things that are going right for dads. We try to supplement where things aren't going on for dads. Looking back, did you see that was realized?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we were at the church at the time. We had marriage groups, which were important. But I don't think there was anything that really emphasized fathering or equipping fathering, and that was something we never. You're right. You worked alongside the church. You didn't tax their resources. All we said is, hey, we want to come support you. And I think really for the most part, it's just like allow us to come alongside and support you. I think that that's the key, is if you, I keep saying, allow us to help us help you, but, not just, not to be afraid, not, I think sometimes one of the things that can get in the way, that I've seen it, is when people think that it's too much of a niche, like, hey, I know one of the challenges at times can be, you don't really need a fathering group. You can just have a men's group, because that's we're all men. It's appealing to me. And it's like, there are valuable lessons to just slow down and learn about what it means to be a spiritual leader, a dad, that you don't necessarily just get from learning to be a man,
right,
so to speak.
It's not happenstance that some of our strongest churches have very strong men's ministries. And I know you always say men's ministry is iron sharpening iron. A fathering ministry are fathers raising men. And so that's the compliment that we try to always push. But that's great insight, John. Thank you for your leadership, and that was quite a step from a retreat, your first retreat exposure to faithful fathering, to taking on a leadership role in the church. But
thank you, Rick.
Well, that's encouragement to you, dads. Spiritual leadership is in the home. That's the priority. But it's also a responsibility to have a spiritual leadership in the church, to raise the bar for fathering, to encourage and equip. And remember, faithful fathering is never about beating up on dads. We're encouraging and equipping you to be a faithful father. And that's the dad you're called to be, and that's the dad the next generation needs. God bless. Godspeed.